Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling Marx's slash the left's economism stalls movement towards socialism slash social and ecological progress. So, sorry for all the slashes and the long involved title, uh, but it's an attempt to condense into less than 100 characters what I'm trying to say here. And so, and it's sort of contains a paradox in it, or or something maybe novel to you, or something you never thought of or associated with Marx and the left. Um, but basically, what I'm saying is that the model of social progress that Marx developed and that has been adopted by the left, not necessarily people who identify themselves as Marxists. So Marx is one example of economism. There are other economisms, and I will talk more about them in other episodes. But economism means that the economy and basically Homo economicus. So the model of the human being as being primarily someone who is about gaining wealth, gaining money, uh, uh, or in the broader sense, utility is a utility monster. Okay, in other words, that is always trying to acquire more, either usually money, usually something to do with resources. You could also say there's a political version of people always being power hungry. So that's a relative of economism. But because Marxism says the base is the economy, and there's the economic base upon which there's the superstructure of politics and of culture upon the economy, Marx fits into the idea of economism. Now, Marx is Marx has many different writings. Marx has voluminous. Uh, his entire work is about a 40-volume set, and and he said, especially in his earlier writings, that you know said all kinds of things that were not economistic. Okay, that were more what I would call humanistic, or um, uh, uh, integrating the more than self-interested parts of human beings, the more than um, uh, simply looking to acquire things, or utility in the broadest sense of what, but one or the other, not necessarily fetishizing per se gold, or the equivalents of that in our contemporary society, the cars, the houses, the so forth and so on, and the money that one uses to buy those things. But that the opposite, or the non-economistic way of thinking, or there's not just one, is to think of human beings as also being motivated by social impulses, somewhat altruistic, of various kinds, altruistic impulses, and that go beyond simple self-interest. So this is paradoxical, because Marx is also for socialism. So Marx says this is the route to socialism, is via class conflict. The motor of history is class conflict. And so class conflict is about the exploitation of the working class and the extraction of surplus value. In other words, that capitalists have to pay workers less than the value that they produce. And the money, that value being a vague word, let's talk about in more concrete terms. They have to bring in more money than they pay their workers, and that is the surplus value that is being extracted according to the labor theory of value, and which is one of the more faulty concepts that Marx built his philosophy upon, his economics upon. So anyway, so what Marx has is a hidden, he hides his ethical concern about the exploitation of the working class. So he hides his own ethics. My argument is that Marx uh, is a has an ethical project, or a philosophical ethical project that he hides behind in his economism. So he straps his ethical concerns about the exploitation of the working class, the greed of capitalists, the motivate. He is both trapped by he traps himself in the world where greed, or where exploitation, even though class conflict will eventually overwhelm, or I'm thinking of the German, but will make obsolete the system of capitalism, that system of exploitation. That conflict is based upon the robbery, essentially, of by the capitalists of the you know, the robbery of their labor, the value of their labor, by the capitalists. Or it's not technically robbery, it's not in legal terms robbery, but they create a legal superstructure that says that exploitation is fair. It's and so forth and so on. But in any case, the extraction, okay, of that value from workers. And so the class conflict is about the workers saying, no, 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 that's mine. Okay, that you're taking from me, what's mine. Now, there is implicit in that the workers get together, that somehow this exploitation sort of creates a common feeling among workers, that they organize, which is not, again, I'm bringing in parts of social, about real observation of real social movements, real labor movements, which involve organizing, which involve the either organizers that are outside the working the labor force that are coming in and trying to organize workers, or within the working class workers who have have some kind of excess time or ability to create bonds and relationships with other workers, and then protest their exploitation by the capitalists. And so I am bringing in this from outside, because that is not that model of the actual action, for instance, of workers organizing and demanding more and getting more for their work. And this is obviously trade unionism. This is reformism. This is not the vision of class conflict that Marx had, which was a revolutionary vision, that these workers would come together as the universal subject of history, that they would take, basically in a form of a coup d'état, would defeat the capitalists, and would take over the state, and then would start building socialism, or would destroy the state and build a new state. Now, this is where, again, so there's another issue of Marx not having a real political system, a systematic way to talk about politics. He was a very fine observer of the politics of his day in his journalism. You can, Marxists and defenders of Marx could point all kinds of places where he had a unique political view that was based in part on his theory. But the actual actions of political actors were not built into his model of history, okay? And the one that eventually was inherited by other Marxists, not necessarily by Marx himself, but what became the dogma, so to speak, of Marxism. And then also and I'm not saying that the ideas of Marxism necessarily are the primary vectors of economism in our society, that there's a lot of other economisms around, but Marx agrees with those economisms in the sense that, and it doesn't distinguish himself enough, in my opinion, from other ordinary economism that is non-revolutionary, that just about I need more. Everybody needs more. Everybody's greedy. Everybody needs more. And there are other views of that come from neoclassical economics, for instance, which is also, is a economics that is economistic. Okay, which maybe all economics must be economistic, though the word political economy, which is the original idea, includes at least politics integrated with economics. Anyway, I'm sorry, but to get to this question of motor or dynamics, so Marx does not build into his model a dynamics of historical change, of which he claims to have. He doesn't build that in, and unfortunately, the left, whether or not they are students of Marx and whether they're following Marx and they refer to him or they don't, and most people nowadays are not referring to Marx, but I'm saying within the patrimony, within the general, he's agreeing with the general hegemonic view of that somehow people are economistic or self-interested, and that is all, okay, and everything else in terms of their social impulses, their altruistic, their use of language to communicate, their sense of being part of a group, their group consciousness, that is considered to be superfluous. It's considered to be not the actual basis of historical change, and not the hard brass tacks. Okay, and history shows that that's not the case. In other words, history shows that people are motivated not only by self-interest, that's there, and it's not to be spurned, and it's not to be not or analyzed, and it's not to be. We shouldn't make a model that makes people out to be not self-interested, but people are also socially minded, are also interested in other people and helping others, in forming relationships with other people, which are not entirely reducible to self-interest. And of course, Marx would, if I said it to Marx, he would agree with that. He would say that's what I'm promoting. He might, but he became caught up by the idea of creating this model of sort of an inexorable motor of history, which was this class conflict. And that class conflict involved, again, the extraction of surplus value, and then the workers banding together somehow. In other words, not within the model, but just sort of would that would become so intolerable that they would be so immiserated. By the constant extraction of surplus value, the diminishing part of the complete value of what they produced, diminishing to what the workers gained, their wages would be suppressed, and they would rise up, and so forth and so on, and so and create a revolution somehow, okay, and then the state would wither away. It's very abstract, and so this is where someone like Lenin and some other thinkers, but Lenin, as being the by far the most influential thinker, created his own theory of how that change happened, okay, and then we have all the disasters. There was some progress associated with some modernizations that occurred in the world. Some nations have become semi-wealthy through a path that started from a Leninist or Maoist, which is a version of Leninism, model of history, but it didn't come from Marx. It wasn't, so they had to add this on to, but still pretending that they were Marxists, but also adding on their political theories, and even so ethical theories. And this is where I think politics, ethics is often expressed through politics. One's ethical views, not only one's economic views, but ethical ideas about the overall worth of humanity and one's own and the worth of our common our common good. In other words, to create a good rather than just to accumulate goods, to work toward a good that is collective and is a form of social progress, a form of improving overall, not just one's own lot, but the lot of everybody around one, and so, or the majority, some or the majority around you, and not, and not your class or your expanded notion of a 99% working class of some kind, or maybe even 100%, maybe everybody, but led by the 99% or by the working class, by ordinary people, not by the richest and most powerful and most advantaged people in the society. So anyway, but the role of ethical concern and language, and also the understanding that Marx himself was not a fully self-conscious, maybe not, no one can be fully self-conscious, but he was a very unself-conscious in some ways, in terms of it, that he did not see his own ethical project in terms of seeing. He hid his ethics in this idea of surplus or the extraction of surplus value, that there was an immiseration of the working class, and that he was standing with other people, with people who were less fortunate than himself. He grew up in a fairly wealthy family, and he which afforded him some leisure to be a revolutionary, and not to just work away as a scrivener or whatever, or as a clerk somewhere. But he used that freedom to have this concern for other people. But again, this concern was not, he didn't understand that, and also his writing. So another portion of ethical and political concern is communication. So vital in politics, it's not just simply this sort of economy that exists prior to language, so to speak, or without language, and without also ethics. And the ethics and in language has embedded in it some ethics as well, that are, I mean, a range of ethics, and language can be used in many different ways. It's flexible, but it tends toward a certain ethical. There's a certain sharing portion, or a certain, that if you're speaking to someone, you recognize them as being conscious and aware, and so you don't see them simply as an instrument to be for you. You're even though, or you're assuming that they have some knowledge of your communication, your wishes, and you're even though that they're really one-sided. In other words, the master-slave relationship is obviously also involves language, and is not at all mutualistic. It's extremely unequal. But anyway, certainly if you have just as with the abolition of slavery, there was that movement was, there was also economic components to the movements to abolish slavery in the United States, and also in Britain, and so forth and so on, or economic factors. There were also critical to that was also the idea that, in fact, it was virtuous. It made one of a higher status in those societies, a higher ethical status, to before abolishing slavery, and often through religion. Religion was part of, at that point in time, particularly a strong portion of let's say, the ethical hierarchy that society had. And so to then push the movement for slavery, one needed to orate, one needed to, as often from the pulpit, but also, like Frederick Douglass, as a former slave, and to create a discourse that motivated people in their ethical concern to do something about slavery, and unfortunately, and also that meant in the United States a military conflict between the North and the South. But so that message didn't get to the slaveholders in the South. It wasn't convincing to them for, among other things, economic reasons. But certainly, the use of language and the use of ethical concepts was very important in that as well. Even though there's also the capitalist that the North was in the conflict in the Civil War. The North was, industrial capitalist society, while the South was a plantation capitalist, or a attached to mercantile capital and not so much to industrial capital, which was growing in the North. So anyway, but this story of how history is pushed forward needs to include, not because it makes me a better person, or maybe it does, but anyway, but it's not. That's not it's simply to reflect on the reality of history, the reality of how our society has changed and how it will change in the future. And this is particularly important for, among other things, or I'm a supporter of movements like Just Stop Oil, or the Last Generation, who are making very, very strong ethical appeals and protest in the form of, and also protest, civil disobedience. Unfortunately, in the United States, we're not as well organized as those groups, and those groups have positioned themselves in a way and have created protests that I believe are effective. They're not immediately effective. They haven't changed government policy yet in those countries, but they are changing the discourse, and they are having an enormous impact on people's consciousness. Even though they're also, creating negative anti-sentiment to some of what they're doing, but that they are clearly changing the view of what needs to happen in the relationship to climate change or climate catastrophe. So I do not see, even though those protesters are often there's often kind of a group. Okay, they're grouped away from what is the conventional left, the sort of the post-Marxist left, you could say, where that kind of high ethical language or that action that is about individual. It's also about survival. They're not. It's nothing esoteric about what they're saying. There's nothing. It just is esoteric in the context of a society that is ignoring them and ignoring the degradation of the biosphere due to our activity, our human activity. And so it goes under the radar for most people, but these people are recognizing the trends, and they're also looking at the science, and they're seeing that it's getting worse, and it is actually, and also in real terms, getting worse in terms of rainfalls and extreme temperatures. Right now in Europe, for instance, is very extreme. In the United States, we've had a huge fluctuation just in the last couple of weeks in terms of both cold and heat, or unseasonable warmth. So it's observable for people, but to organize that into a complete ethical package, and also to place ethics not as something that is dessert, or that it's something that comes at the tail end, the tail of the dog, that it's something that is the dog that is wagging the tail. So in other words, that not entirely, there's also, and I'm also, Marx is correct. One of his most brilliant sayings was that people make history, but not under conditions of their own choosing. So that is actually a bit of wisdom from Marx that I think is very, very important. I don't think he fully embraced in his actual writing, his theory, the idea of people making history. So, I mean, he created a model of sort of a mechanical working class, in my opinion, that made history through this this sort of almost impersonal class conflict that sort of in a way, I mean, there are certain things about Marx's impersonal systems descriptions that are very evocative of business as usual in our society and in the societies he was observing. But at the same time, business as usual changes. Okay, it always changes. Okay, it's not always the same, and those moments of change have an ethical component. They have an economic component. They also have an ethical and political. The ethical is almost always or often mediated by politics. Not all, but you have to be there and recognizing and saying, that's humanity. That's also our humanity. That's not only the province of people who sit in ivory towers or in church pulpits. It's something that all of us, how we have it in it, we have it in all of us, okay, and it motivates our actions, and also is the potential, is part of the motor of history, okay, and it's part of what pushes history either forward or it can go backward too. So it's not an ineluctable force. It's a force we have to summon out of ourselves, okay, to create the change. So anyway, so I'm just touching on so many different issues here, but I wanted to point this out, this inconsistency in Marx out, this lack of he claims to have found the motor of history, but he leaves out what, in my opinion, is the key sets of gears that need to, whether engage the motor to the wheels or however you want to use that metaphor, but that he's missing some gears with it, even though there's also economics is important. It needs to be, you need to have a correct, I think, economics, or a realistic and economics to be effectively changing society and effectively creating progress, creating a better society. So it's not no to economics or political economy, but it's a no to economism and that stalls this motor. Okay. Anyway, so please share your thoughts in the comments below, and also, if you like the video, please like it, and also, if you're enjoying Politics 2100, please subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.